it's not intended. I think given the length of the meeting yesterday and we're meeting today, I'm proposing that we do not meet next week, which is in keeping with our week off. Secondly, we had agreed to have, for want of a better word, a retreat of members. I'm going to try and work with the clerk to set it. Either we'll do it on the day that we would normally meet, or we'll try another day, but I think that there's a need for us to tidy up some of our housekeeping. One of the things that I think is very important, members, is today we intend to finish our deliberations with the Ministry of Mining, Energy and Technology. Science, Technology and Energy. One of the things that I would like us to do, some recommendations went out to RIA report. But I think importantly, and we've had this discussion before, the report has to have some guidelines that will prevent something like this happening again. So I'm going to suggest that we attempt to look at the report and maybe even deliberate on it during the retreat. Let me just
clarify what you said the report have to deal with.
We would do a report for the entire ministry with all the things that we've gotten out of Petrogram, etc., etc. But I preface, let me just officially, I was trying to, but let me just start. Member Paul, well, you had indicated a desire to pray.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for enabling us to be present again for the meeting of this committee. I want to ask your blessings on all of us, especially our new member from Central St. James, as he joins this team. Continue to imbue us with wisdom, knowledge, understanding. Enable us to work together to ensure that the work of this committee can be accomplished in the way that it ought to. Father, these and other blessings we ask of you in your dear name's sake. Amen.
Thank you. I was delaying a bit because we were trying to find the actual, the Parliament normally sends us the order for the new member. The Secretary to the committee was not here at the time and has not received it. But for the time being, I'd like to welcome the newest member of the team, Hero Clark from Central, isn't it? Central St. James. And he replaces Minister Favour Williams, who...
Oh, I am disappointed, Chairman.
Okay, yes. So, members, you know, it's a good thing that we put Fitz beside Juliet. Should be interesting. Should be an interesting meeting. but I know I don't know who is going to keep who in check. But nonetheless, the members, I'm going to suggest that we put in the comments. If we're not going to meet before, I think it's one of those reports that has to. I'm going to suggest that I'm hoping within the next 2 weeks to get some information. Let us see if we can have our retreat, have a discussion. Maybe one of the things we should discuss at the retreat is the report as well. And in discussion with the leader of government business at the House, one of the things that we're going to try and do, or no, let me change that wording. One of the things we must do, and he has committed to it, is take our reports in a timely manner. We have been getting, we're debating reports now that are 2 years old. You can't get, it has no meaning to go over something in a current account 2 years later. So one of the things that I'm going to ask him is, even while we're clearing up those reports, which we hope to do with dispatch, we will also indicate that the reports that we table now, that we take them put them to the front of the line while they're still meaningful.
Before we move on, I just want to add a word of commendation and, to the clerk for her very hard work yesterday. She was under severe stress to really get this report out in time for the House yesterday, and she must be commended for her very hard work and tenacity of purpose.
Yes, I think both herself and the consultant, I think both of them. And one of the things I had a discussion with the Minister of Finance and Public Service before and after, and indicated to him that we have a role to play, which has been legislated by law, and it is very difficult for us to do our deliberations and at the end of the deliberations to generate a report and table it on the same day and have meaningful discussion. So Parliament finished late last night when, I think in a more timely manner, if the supplementary budget where it is where it's absolutely necessary that we be involved, that or legislated that we be involved, that in those we look at a way in which we're given more time to look at the reports, more time to generate our reports at the end. So rather than do it on everything in one day, whether or not we can have the deliberations one day and generate the report in another. But we're going to have some discussions on procedure because it is a very challenging exercise.
May I just add also to Mr. Bartley to commendation for him, because both persons would have worked assiduously together in putting that report together.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to comment on the point you raised about the timing. And it's a bit unfortunate because it's not the first time we have to deal with the supplementary budget. And even in another period while your predecessor chairman was in the chair, we recognized this challenge, and there was an agreement for the supplementary to come to the at the minimum a week before. In fact, it was tendered at preferably 2 weeks it comes before, and it does not happen. Now, the truth of the matter is not an emergency, because the ministry would have known before that it has a supplementary budget to table. And therefore, if with due regard to the work that the committee has to do, then it must be placed with sufficient time before the committee that it can look at it, the analysis done, it comes before the committee, we deliberate, speak to the ministry, and we fulfill our statutory duty in a very timely and complete way. So I think we have to, it's a new minister, yes, but the ministry is not new.
Yeah.
And all the technical staff, etc., should be aware that that is the arrangement, because they need us to facilitate them. As I said, it's a statutory requirement. Yes. So only out of respect for the committee, they submit. But the problem, quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, is when they submit it and then we acquiesce to the request, it now normalizes that undesirable situation. So we have to send a strong message that if it's not given in a timely way, it's not going to be taken on the committee, and the committee takes that position. We can't say to entities out there they must comply to procedures and we are not complying with it. We're not dealing with an emergency.
No. So I had the discussion with Minister Clark, and I think we'll have further discussions as we move along. As I said, this is not, yesterday was a very challenging exercise. All right. Okay, so members, I'm going to ask that we allow the members, please. I might have to separate the two of you. If you continue like this, I'm going to have to build a wall. I hear the members calling out, we need to build a wall. All right, could you let in the... Yes, good morning to you and your team. We're really hoping to have a short deliberation today, get out as quickly as possible. I would give you the opportunity to introduce your team, and then I think we can take it from there.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, and good morning to members of the committee, my colleagues. With accompanying me this morning are the following persons: Mr. Oswald Williams, Chairman, NISOL; Mrs. Carolyn Warren, former Managing Director, NISOL; Ms. Angela Prendergast, Acting Managing Director, NISOL; Mr. Kirk Borton, Acting Chief Engineer; Mr. Rayon Hamilton, Construction Supervisor, NISOL; and from the Ministry of Energy, I have the Chief Technical Director for Energy to my left, Ms. Michelle Forbes. To her left is Mrs. Janet Coleman Howlett, Principal Director, Office of the Prime Minister, and to my immediate right is Mr. Fitzroy Vidal, Principal Director, Energy. I think that completes the...
All right. Members, there was some questions asked before, and I would suggest Mr. Paul had asked the questions and had requested the presence of Mr. Williams and Ms. Warren, just to get some clarification. I think maybe how we could probably start off though is, welcome to committee. I think it's just more some clarification we'd like today. And I think most of the information is out in the public domain already, and we just want to sort of just clarify the position. I'm going to turn over. I think Mr. Powell has some questions he'd like to ask. So maybe if you would
thank you very much,
and
Chairman.
We're going to try and keep the questions as
I intend to
as
be
possible.
very brief today, and I'd like to extend my own welcome as well. Before, Mr. Chairman, the Permanent Secretary, I like whenever we meet just for us to be reminded how long now the Ministry of Energy is with your ministry.
Approximately 2 months.
2 months. All right. And yesterday in the PAAC, we did take note of Petrojam and the fact that the budget was reduced. And that's another matter, not for today's sitting, but just to let you know that there's this continuing concern about the future of Petrojam. And the project that was earmarked in the budget for this year has been shifted, and it therefore means that that timeline that we have been watching in relation to when the country is shifting to LNG vis-a-vis heavy fuel oil, that timeline is running and the project is not happening. But I don't want to belabor the point today because that really wasn't the purpose of our meeting today.
Yeah, but as in response, member, you will recall that a review committee has been set up by the Prime Minister to look at Petrojam in its entirety and to make recommendations. They have started their work, and we are hoping that whatever their findings are and recommendations will take care of or address some of the concerns that you may have.
But the timeline looms, and that is the major preoccupation, that with the 190 megawatt plant coming on stream, they told us yesterday by June 2019, come that time they're going to lose a significant amount of demand for heavy fuel oil and diesel, and revenue is therefore going to be affected. We were told that they are looking to provide the IPPs with products, but as you know, the independent private producers of electricity do form a very small part of the total electricity mix. And because of that, I do not believe that there is a plan, apart from the upgrade and expansion, that can really deal with the shortfall that will occur from JPSCO exiting the market for heavy fuel oil and diesel.
Your comments are noted, and we will follow up accordingly. But as I said, I'm aware that the existence of Petrojam, its operations going forward, is one of the terms of the engagement of the review committee.
Yes. All right, thanks. To both Mrs. Warren and the chairman, the questions that I will ask will relate to both of you in the former function and your current function. Especially sometimes it's not clear what is the role of the board vis-a-vis the role of the online management staff. And I want to firstly understand who were the signatories of the accounts at Nessal, and Mr. Williams, you might be able to, because this would have been approved by the board.
You can just help with the microphone, please. Yes.
Member, you want the current signatures on it?
Yes, you could start there.
Okay. In category A, you have Oswald Williams, myself.
I'm not.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Oswald Williams, chairman. That's me. Miss Sophia Deere, director. Miss Caroline Warren, managing director, acting. Miss Angela Prendergast, director of finance. We still have Mr. Lawrence Pommels there, but he is to be removed. He has not been allowed to.
Well, I'm just trying to understand. We heard that Mr. Pommels' position of signing officer was during the period when Mr. Brown was on vacation or on leave. When Mr. Brown returned, did he, well, it's clear he did not cease being a signing officer. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is correct. By the way, Mr. Pommels was not a temporary signing officer, he was a signing officer.
So, did he become a signing officer when he assumed the acting position of chief engineer, or he was a signing officer in his substantive position as operations manager? Engineer, all right, operations engineer.
The resolution from the board at the time was to remove Mr. Brown, Mr. Anthony Brown, to remove the personnel officer and the cost accountant. Mr. Brown was not the only person who was removed. When Mr. Brown was going on leave, I pointed out as the managing director that we would have a problem with the signing of the checks, and the board decided to add Mr. Pommels as he was the one who was going to relieve.
No, I think this is a connection. Push it down. Come, Chip.
Yeah.
Turn it on.
To relieve Mr. Brown. And I just want to point out something, read the signing of the checks as...
Well, but no, sir, before you do that, I just want to understand. So, was it that Mr. Brown was not intended to return and to be a signing officer when he returned while he was removed? Or was this meant to be temporary?
It was not meant to be temporary. 3 persons were removed.
Okay.
When I came first and I answered the question, I remember that I had pointed out that Mr. Brown was going on leave to the board and that would have to add somebody. It was not a temporary arrangement. Mr. Brown, 3 persons were removed because the board has the right to appoint anybody to sign on the check. When I say anybody, I mean there's no rule or any law that says the chief engineer must sign on the check. So Mr. Pommels was kept there until he he ran in a problem, but he has been removed from the account.
You mentioned Miss Sophia there. Who is Miss Sophia there?
Miss Sophia there is a she's a director of the company.
What, she has any other position, substantive position?
She's head of the HR committee.
Okay. Is she related to the ministry in any way? She works at the ministry?
Ministry of, which ministry?
Of energy?
Not that I know of. Not at the moment. No.
So she was appointed as a director?
Yes, she was.
Who from the ministry sit on the board?
Mr. Parker, Michael Parker. I couldn't remember. Michael Parker.
Right. So you would relate to the ministry as managing director?
Yes, I would.
And who would you relate to at the ministry in relation to matters affecting Nessel and the ministry? The
PS. The PS at the time, who was Hilary Alexander.
Okay. I'm told that Ms. Dare also worked at the ministry, but at the time.
She was employed to the ministry at the time.
In what position? What position? Acting.
Member Paul, well, as far as I can recall, Ms. Dare was the assistant to the then minister, Minister Wheatley, at a point, right?
All right. So she was an assistant to the minister, and she was also a signing officer at Nessel, as in her capacity as a director, as a board. She was a board director, but a signatory to the account. So when you got there, Mr. Pommels was already there.
Yes, Mr. Pommels has been with Nessel since 2011.
Right, and he was promoted since you got there.
Right, yes, he was.
You were not instructed to promote him, were you?
When you say instructed, explain that for me, please.
Well, did anybody ask you to advance Mr. Pommel's career at Nessel?
As far as I was told, Mr. Pommels was up for promotion, I think, from 2014-15 thereabout, because he was one of the most experienced engineers.
Point of order, sir, Chairman. So can the member ask if as staff was instructed to be promoted?
Yes, I can ask that. I can ask any question, really. Yes. Were you instructed by the board? Were you instructed by anybody to consider him for promotion?
No, I was not instructed by the board.
So on what basis did you promote him? Just remind us.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Pommels was not the only one who was promoted.
Yes, but we're talking about Mr. Pommels.
Mr. Pommels. Okay. When we looked at his record, and as I said before, when I was here the last time, persons had to be sent on leave because the cost on the company was horrendous, so we knew from then that certain categories of persons had to be sent on leave, and we needed people to fill those, especially the chief engineer. And Mr. Pommels was the best one at the time to fill that position because, one, he was the most experienced. The other two who could be considered had less than 2 years in the company. So that's why we considered Mr. Pommels. We looked at his file. He was a good worker. There were no letters of reprimand. There was no reason not to promote Mr. Pommels. It's unfortunate Mr. Pommels got himself into something with the law, and then I think everybody's working backward to say certain things. So,
all right. Could I just?
Mr. Chair, with the permission of the member, just to give clarification to a question answered. Ms. Warren said that he was due for promotion. My understanding is that one can only be promoted in a vacant position or in a new position that the organization has created. So I can understand that the person was in line for promotion should a vacancy occur in the organization. Or, as I said, there was the established need for a new position that the person will be promoted to. And I recall in earlier deliberations, it was asked whether or not the operational engineer position was an established position in the ministry, or whether or not the ministry, the agency, had gotten the approval of the Ministry of Finance for that new position. And the answer was in the negative. So I would, in answering Minister Paul's question, I was just curious as to how this promotion does take place on the basis of being deserving of it or qualified for it when no particular vacancy existed.
The position was sent to the Ministry of Finance for approval, but and I was told by the HR, some HR information, that he could be promoted into the position temporarily for 2 years, and that's what we used to promote him.
As a signing officer, was he also involved in the approvals of payments for work done?
The chief engineer and the managing director, I as managing director have to sign all payments. If it's even a pen that is being bought, I have to approve it. The chief engineer has to approve all payments for work done, all invoices. The chief engineer doesn't, and in this case, Mr. Pommels does not approve payments for other things like for purchases or utility bills or anything, just for work done.
All right, so he would enable work to be done, contracting work to be done, and sign off for the payment for such work.
Yes, because in his capacity as acting chief engineer and as a chief engineer, when the work is done and the supervisors go out and see that the work is properly done and payment is to be done, it has to be signed by the chief engineer, by the supervisor, and then finally by me.
All right, so I want to take you now to the CAP projects that have been some concern for us, and probably I should start by Mr. Williams. Can you explain to us what role did the board play in relation to the execution of the CAP projects?
The CAP program, the managing director came to the board and sought permission to enter into a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with Universal Service Fund in order to install these CAPs, and we gave her the permission. She managed the program after that. It was her baby, it was her kind of a program. What we did was to ask her follow government's procurement procedure, and she took over from there.
All right, so you instructed that the procurement procedures of the government be followed?
Yes, we told her to follow government procurement procedure, yes, and government rule, yes.
Right. What other projects did you treat in this way? I know there's a CAP project. I gather that there were other projects. Could you speak to those other projects that were assigned to the then managing director for execution?
Hold on. The other projects were, I wouldn't say assigned to her. Market, she had responsibility for everything. It's just that the CAP was something that she carved out. Yeah. It was her baby, and we just tell her, look here, make sure you follow.
I want to ask in particular, the Housing Agency of Jamaica, they had a project.
Yes.
Did that come to the board?
That came to the board, but if I remember right, that came to the board before our time. It's an ongoing something.
It's an ongoing?
Yes.
There were some funds from the Tourism Enhancement Fund that would have come to the board.
Yeah, remember, by the way, those are operational businesses.
Yes,
but if you ask, I will tell you.
Yes.
That I am aware.
You're aware.
That there was some squatter settlement to be done. The tourism people providing some funds as.
Yeah. I don't want to go there.
Hold on. Can I be allowed to start?
Yes, what I want to say, Chairman, I want to come back to that, but I had touched on CAP. So let us finish with CAP,
fine,
and I'll come back to that. All right. So I just wanted to understand the procedure of the board, whether or not all of these projects would have to be approved and handed over for administration by the CEO and team. So you have said so.
Yes, yes.
Right. So in relation to the CAP projects, Ms. Warren, we were told that you were a member of the board of directors for Universal Service Fund and also the chairperson for the projects committee.
That's correct.
Right. And it was that committee that approved the relationship between the USF and NESOL in relation to the CAP project?
No,
No.
that was not the committee. The projects committee does not deal with that. The projects committee dealt with the CAP sites, the actual approval of where CAP sites are to go, and also projects for example, you said UTEC, CMU, persons who need funds for technological things in their areas. That project did not come to the project committee.
So the relationship between Universal Service Fund and NESOL, at what,
Yes.
where was this approved?
Okay. I think most people don't understand what NESOL does and what NESOL is.
Yes.
NESOL is a contractor. For example, the Universal Service Fund, both the Director of Finance and the Chairman said they weren't aware that the work would have been outsourced.
Yes, they said so last
Right.
week. Yes.
All work at NESOL is outsourced. If we even have to change out a light bulb, it is outsourced. Everything at NESOL is outsourced.
I think the reason why they said so last week, though, Mrs. Warren, is that they do their own outsourcing, and they believe that they could have undertaken that themselves without your involvement.
No, they outsourced it to us and also to the Caribbean Maritime Institute. Hold on. A memorandum of understanding was done between ourselves and the Universal Service Fund, and I'll just read a line here, which says, whereas NESOL as a government institution has established a team of solar energy professionals as well as external partners. That was in the MOU. Now to get back to how we became a part of this thing. I served on the Universal Service Fund board, also as the managing director of NESOL. NESOL's mandates, they were REP before, to provide electricity for 100, the whole island. Right now they're at 97.5%. In 2015, the government expanded the mandate to include renewables. When I got to NESOL, they had done nothing in renewables yet. The only thing that was ongoing was a discussion with National Water Commission to put solar panels on some of their stations.
And the indoor sports center.
And okay, I
Yes.
was not a part of that. Anyway, when I sat on the board, I realized that a lot of the CAP sites were closed because the electricity bill could not be paid. Right. Now these CAP sites are in communities for persons to do their homework, people who don't have the luxury of having internet at home. The decision was made to put solar panels to solarize these CAPs. I saw that as a great opportunity for NESOL to get involved and to start their renewables. I pointed out to the board that we could do it, we could start, because we had sent, up to when I got there, 2 persons had been trained in solar technology, but they had done anything. The USF, the board itself, they said, but you haven't done anything like this before. I said, just give us a chance with some, because I'm the type of person who gets excited at new things. And I wanted NESOL to step into the renewables market. We had also started something with HAJ to do energy audits. We were given the opportunity to do some of the assessments. Our consultant, Mr. Christie of NTRAC, was the one who assisted us with that. After we did those, USF was excited, they were done properly. They then asked us to do some more. So we did the assessment for all of those. When the time came for the actual work to start, we were given, I think, 10, and then they took back, I think, 5 and gave it to CMU. We asked Mr. Christie, because he is experienced in solar energy, to assist us. Mr. Entrack said they were busy. Mr. Lawrence Pommels at the time, the acting chief engineer, it was his task to find somebody to do this work. He contacted a firm, Kimroy Bailey and Associates. They went and they looked at the site. He said he could handle it. We waited, and USF was at us. Now, this was my, what should I call it, my reputation on the line. So Mr. Christie, Entrack, nobody could do it. Nobody was able to do it. And let me point out that these campsites, as I said, Nessol outsources all their labor. The labor for each of these campsites go from between $350,000 to I think a maximum of $500,000, which is well within the government guidelines. Each one, Nessol has the system that they use, a computer system, everything to do pole lines. We use the same system to do the caps. Each cap site was given an extension number and done individually.
All right. So what I'm trying to resolve is what appears to be a contradiction between the understanding of USF as they reported to us last week and what you're explaining, because USF is in the business of establishing these sites. They procure on their own furniture, computers. They outsource the provision of internet service. So we were wondering, why then would they come to Nessol to outsource the electricity service, when in truth and in fact, Nessol did not have the competence at the time. Hence, you're going to outsource. And I want to look now to, but you understand the problem that the two agencies are contending, that they didn't know you were going to outsource, having outsourced to you, and because they would go directly to the supplier. So you have outsourced the work to Peak and CMU, is that true? CMU. What role did CMU play in this?
Nessol did not outsource any work to CMU. USF outsourced the work to CMU.
What about Peak?
Peak Energy through Mr. Lenny Gordon is our contractor, one of the contractors that we were able to source to do some of the work to install.
When was Peak established?
Okay. Mr. Lenny Gordon, who is the sole director of Peak, as you see in the media, we started working with Mr. Gordon in April of 2017, right? April of 2017, because he was involved in the assessments, etc. When the assessment, I recommended Mr. Gordon, and let me put it here straight. I worked at Nationwide News Network for 14 years. Mr. Gordon was the general manager. I was the sales and receivables manager. I know Mr. Gordon in two capacities, as at Nationwide and also as a contractor who does excellent work.
An energy expert? He's an energy.
Yes, he does. When we say energy expert,
yes.
Clarify that for me.
No, what are his competencies in relation to the provision of energy systems, solar systems, etc.?
Okay, Mr. Gordon has done some solar, he has done building, he has built radio stations, but he was working along with Entrack.
Entrack?
Right.
Oh, who is Entrack?
That I mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Christie, who assisted with the assessments, etc., and who also was involved in the
Entrack. Could you spell Entrack for me? I don't remember, yes.
E-N-T-R-A-K. Oh, I have it right here. N-ERTRAK, Energy Management Systems.
And who are these now?
They were the lead consultants on the project.
The CAP project?
The solar project. We keep calling it a CAP project, and I think that's where we're getting.
No, I'm quite clear.
On the solar project from the beginning, because we had to do assessments, the scope, and all of that for the work to begin.
So, Track was a consultant.
Right.
They were responsible for scoping the project. And we're talking about the provision of solar systems. So where did Mr. Gordon come into this?
When the project needed to be done, we contacted Mr. Christie. He, as I said before, was not able to see the project through to the end because he said he had work doing. So we needed to find somebody who could work along with him, who he could bring up to speed. I recommended Mr. Gordon because I knew the quality of his work. And this is a provision of solar systems. Solar systems. To begin with, at this time, we are not sure we're getting the work, At this time, at the beginning, we are not sure that we are going to be engaged. We had to prove that we knew what we were doing before we were engaged.
You're aware, though, that there are many companies in Jamaica that provide solar systems?
I'm quite aware of that.
Right. So when was Peak established?
Okay, so we engaged the services of Mr. Gordon on the 19th of April 2017.
Right, but I'm talking about Peak now.
Yes, I'm getting there. Yeah. After that was done and we were looking for outsourcing the work, Mr. Gordon informed me that seeing that he was now into solar, he would be forming a company because he would be getting work otherwise. And I think he formed this company, sometime in July or June.
So just to understand, Mr. Gordon...
July or June of...
2017.
Right, so Mr. Gordon was working with a company that was involved in developing concepts, etc.
He wasn't working with the company, he was working alongside them.
He was being paid?
Well, Nessol would have to pay him because we also engaged the services.
Okay. So you had contracted Mr. Gordon to do what?
To the assessments, to assist with getting the 28, no, it wasn't 28 at the beginning. It was like 20 at the beginning. The scope for the 20 sites to be done. This big document. Because Mr. Christie informed us that he could help us, he could start, but he could not see it through. So we had to get somebody else.
All right, so Mr. Gordon
recommended Mr. Gordon.
Was contracted to do scoping and developmental works in relation to the solar systems to be provided through the CAP project. Having done that, he formed a company.
After that, yes, I think like 3 months after.
Right, and the company was formed to now execute solar system.
Yes, throughout Jamaica, not just for Nessa.
P.S., you're following this. I'm sure you are. But was Peak Energy a registered company with the National Contracts Commission?
I just want to.
I don't know.
Raise one question in relation to.
Yeah, sorry.
Just to find out if Peak was contracted to provide this solar system, or those systems were bought by
It was just the labor. Just the labor.
Okay, I want to be sure about it.
Yeah, but I said that before, that Nessol only outsources work.
Right.
That's all.
He did not
provide the solar system, just the labor. All as Nessol does, as their mandate, it is bought by the company.
And I want to understand, who did Nessol purchase the solar systems from?
The solar systems were purchased from GetSol warehouse. Pardon? Directly, yes.
Not through Peak?
No, not through Peak.
Yes.
Member Paulwell, let me say again that the only thing that is outsourced at Nessol is the work. And when you outsource the work,
just a moment, so that it helps in terms of clarity for all listening. You have to remember that in Jamaica, some words have two meanings. So work actually includes material and work for many of us as Jamaicans. If you say labor, it's very clear that it is service that is being provided and not material and services.
So I was asking,
Thank you.
is peak registered with the national contracts?
I don't know.
Would you not have that in your contemplation before you contract with anybody to do business with,
No,
with you?
to do labor, sorry. For no, please.
Members, please. Members.
Please understand that peak.
Hold on 1 second, please. Let us. No, is it a point of order, sir? Or?
I would want to think so.
It's his first
and you have to understand this is my first meeting, and therefore I am green to it. So, Mr. Chairman, the reason for us to be having a conversation is that we realize that is only one member that has been laying all the questions, and we have burning issues just the same, Mr. But we don't have all day. The same thing happened yesterday. We don't have all day. So if my good member could give us some time also to chip in.
Member Paul.
Yes,
Member
Chairman,
Paul,
the only reason why you did
there's some
defer to
sympathy.
me. No, the only reason why you did is because of my familiarity with the subject matter.
But don't believe my good member. Don't believe that you're the only one who have an understanding.
I am not the only one.
Also
yes, I'm not the only one.
All right.
But having probed this matter to this extent, I need to be allowed the further questions. And
member
everybody is going to be given a chance to ask questions.
Member Paul,
yes,
I'm going to, but please, we have had this discussion, and I think that.
Yes, but I think we are getting some valuable information, and we should allow the process to precisely. There are members who wanted to ask questions, and they won't need to ask questions now because we've been probing in this efficient manner. I just want to
let me answer about the NCC. In my 18 months or 20 months at Nessal,
back to the situation of the.
On the same capsides, just one more question. In terms of the solar services provided, the labor element. And why I'm asking this is to make sure we're very clear that the government procurement guidelines were in fact adhered to. $1.5 million is the extent of the contract that you would be able to engage in. It's now $2 million. Yes, engaging without that person having an NCC. Did you, Ms. Warren, in any case, organize to have services provided by any contractor, that's labor, that exceeded that $2 million?
No, I did not.
Okay, we just want to make sure.
Mr. Warren, yes. In relation to Peak, how much money passed through Peak in relation to the work that they were doing? How much?
So far for Peak has been paid 12.5 million or thereabout. I think they're owed 9-point-something million.
So they're above the threshold?
Hold on. They're not above the threshold because they were done extension by extension. Separate sites. We did not get everything from USF at one time. It was
beg of you, sir.
She's answered the question.
Please, hold on. Mr. Clark.
Right. Yes, it is most unfortunate that in the media, 1 minute it is a contract for 66-point-something million. And
but that's how much was it for?
Million, yes.
What was the total amount, please?
The total amount is 21-point-something million so far, paid over a period. And I just want to drop in here that 21 million. 16 checks have been paid to Peak so far, and only one has been signed by Mr. Pommels. All the rest have been signed by myself and Mr. Prendergast.
But they were approved by Mr. Pommels?
Yes, they would have. As the chief engineer, they would have approved.
Okay, very well. So how much is owed to Peak?
I think it's 9-point-something million, and there are 9 more sites to be done.
So that would bring you up to $30 million.
No, I think the total was 21.
Yes, plus 9.
No, the 21 is
21
the total.
Is the total. 21 is the total amount.
Divide that by 19.
Through Peak.
Due to Peak.
Right.
Yeah. It's 19 sites.
Right. So let me understand now in relation to the tourism enhancement.
Tourism enhancement. Ms. Warren, could you help us to appreciate why you didn't just contract that $20-odd million one time and ensure that the person had NCC for the $20-odd million if you realize that it would have been the same contractor who would have been used to provide the service site after site after site? Please explain to us how you managed to get to a place where you have 20 sites to do or 19 sites to do, and the total is $20-odd million, and you ended up with a contractor that got all of them. Did you work out this contract all at the same time? How did that happen?
First of all, we didn't get all the sites at once, and that is the key. We got some, I think we got 5 at one time, then 2 months down the road we got 3, then we got, so it was not that we got all of them at one time, because we have the memorandum of understanding that we have with USF, a figure could not be put in like a contract for 60 million or 70 million, because it was an ongoing process. They have 259 sites to do, so they were doing them, so the contract would go from 21 million to probably 400 million in the end if we were good enough to get all of them. CMU got some, so it was an ongoing thing.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a bit concerned. Mr. Lenny Gordon was engaged in a, shall I say, consulting capacity first. He said in April there about 2017, and then he subsequently morphed into a company that he established in June, July. In the public service, there are established procedures for the procurement of services. So even if it is labor that is going to be engaged, there is an established procedure. My question, Chairman, was those procedures adhered to? Was Mr. Lenny Gordon, whatever his name is, and stroke Peak, what process of engagement was employed for bringing Mr. Gordon and his subsequent company on board? And the next question is, I gather from the discourse that these were all individual sites, but quite frankly, if I anticipate 100 sites to be done, and I bring on somebody for one, I just keep on multiplying until I get to the 100 rather than one contract for all of them. And what is clear is that there's a multiplicity of sites. As was said, is what 19 payments were made for the 16 payments were made for 16 sites, for 19 sites. So there's a multiplicity of the same. He's on for one, got another one, and I don't hear in that exchange what process was enforced that anybody else, any other Jamaican who have the competence to do one of these sites would have the opportunity to do it. So I want to be clear on what the process was, and that there are documentation in place to substantiate where they advertise, how many persons applied or tendered, shortlisted, what the process was, and I also want to know whether or not the board was satisfied that those procedures of engagement were adhered to in the process. Because in it all, Mr. Chairman, it's all about transparency, and insofar as public resources are concerned, it is to give a wide cross-section of Jamaicans the opportunity to participate in these opportunities that are available.
Member, I think you are still at the point, I might be wrong, where you think everything was gotten at one time, so it could have been tendered. As I said before, I followed the exact procedure that exists at NESOL, engagement of services for work. One of the reasons why the work took so long because we were way over time and Universal Service Fund was on our backs, was because we were trying to source other persons or other companies to outsource the work. And I have a letter from Universal Service Fund which can back up that they wrote me regarding the tardiness, and one line, additionally, you have advised that another work team will be created to expedite this protracted manner. NESOL does pole lines and has been doing pole lines from 1975. They have a database of contractors, workmen that they go to. This was new to NESOL. I will not say they were not teething pains. We were trying to build a database which would be built over time that we could call on to do that. At NESOL, we have done millions of dollars of work since I've been there and before. I've never seen any tendered because it falls below the threshold. All we do is outsource the labor, and that's the same thing. Your question of why peak and peak alone, when Mr. Gordon did the first three, Universal Service Fund was totally satisfied with what they got. During that time, when one was done, at the same time we're trying to find other persons. We were not successful, so Mr. Gordon just ended up doing those.
Mr. Chairman, please, that response is totally unsatisfactory, and I tell you why. I heard Ms. Warren made mention about this long track record of NESOL with pole contractors and so forth over the years that been used. So I would presume there is a body of such contractors that can be drawn from, right? Well, solar or whatever. But, but what I didn't get an answer for, what was the process used to engage Mr. Gordon and subsequently Peak Energy? Directly. Mr. Gordon came on board anew in April. What was the process of engaging Mr. Gordon, who by the records subsequently become the dominant provider of these services to these many 19 sites? I don't hear in the response. We have a short list. NESOL been involved in this poll thing and whatever for so many years. We have 5, 6, 10 contractors engaged, and you ask them to tender or you pull from them or spread it out amongst them. No, I am concerned because I realize that Mr. Gordon came on board in April, never been a part of the NESOL operation before, doing all the things that they used to be, and subsequently become the dominant provider of these services or site work for 19 sites. Where is all other persons of competence that could be out there? And I asked the question before and I'm repeating it. What was the process of engaging these service providers? Was it through select tender? Was it through bidding? How is it? Is it just I know somebody and I just engage him? I need clarification on that.
Direct contracting was used. And the direct contracting.
Chairman, no, it's not a grapevine. Chairman, we made a commitment that we would not come back here today and operate in this way. Ms. Warren indicated that they have had a history of doing direct contracting. The amount that was being contracted was less than $2 million. Universal Service Fund was happy with the quality of the work. They continued. If we as a committee have an issue with that, then we need to ask that the government changes the way its policy operates in respect of these matters. So going forward, it cannot continue to be done that way anymore. It doesn't make sense we badger her over the head for operating in keeping with what are the current guidelines. We can only make recommendations going forward if it is that we have found a gap and we need to plug that gap.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on what Member Holness said, there are no breaches indicated from what she has said.
Mr. Turlong, please, Mr. Dunn. Well, no, I don't know that you have that opportunity. I have Mr. Clark waiting as well. So if you're yielding, please leave to Mr. Clark.
Chairman,
No.
I don't have the opportunity to yield.
Well,
I'm yielding to him.
Well, fine. No, but if you are yielding, I'm going to Mr. Clark after. So please, just let me know what you prefer.
No. Yielding doesn't mean you go to Terra long after. Yielding means I'm giving up mine. All right, let me ask my question.
Please, Mr. Dunn, please, let us...
But Chairman, I mean, yes, let us. Let us. My question is, first I must commend Ms. Warren for trying to move Nessel, not just from straight pole line installation to renewables, because renewables is the future. So she took that decision to move Nessel in that direction. The question I wanted to ask, and I wanted to go over that, the answer, Ms. Warren, is that for the renewables that you did, USF contracted you, Nessel as a contractor. What was the response from Nessel with regards to the quality of the work that Nessel did?
From USF, or the quality of the work that we did, they were completely satisfied, and there were certain guidelines in the memorandum of understanding that we had to follow, getting them certified, warranty, etc. All of that is done, and all of them have been passed.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as far back as 2007, I was made aware of then REP, now Nessel. Mr. Chairman, ever since then I knew it's supposed to be an agency, an arm of government, and one of their duty is to be profitable, or else they are going to go in the ground, and not underground, but in the ground. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing wrong with them seeking jobs that will be profitable to them as they are in the job of outsourcing. One of the things that Mrs. Warren says, and I am going to heap the accolades on her shoulder today, that she has been doing a wonderful job at Nessel. Or was doing a wonderful job at Nessel. Miss, thank you very much. It's my first meeting and I'm learning. That's okay with me too. What has happened, Mr. Chairman, and you must understand that CAP, the project CAP, is from USF, and they are getting funding from an entity who wants to see end results, and end results of the highest quality. What she's saying is that the first 3 jobs that was done by one Mr. Gordon was of that standard that USF was very grateful and appreciative of the work, and therefore did not need to go outside the line of what was happening. Also, what my goodly member, colleague member, needs to know is that at the time when the CAP site came on board, there was no need for Ensol to be doing solar. It was a new era. They said it on more than one occasion. It was a baby.
No, she said it.
She said it. It's just that you don't listen. You don't listen, and that's your problem, Mr. Jackson. Remember, Jackson, that's your problem. You need to listen more. Right? And it don't make sense that we come here today again, and we're going to go beyond the time. And I'm going to be here for the longest while. And if you continue to cut me same way, we're going to be here for all day. And you're... No, I'm not frightening your son.
Members, please. You have a question? Yes. Yes, but I'm
no,
just
I didn't
saying,
say I was asking.
No, please, I don't. No, but then
I
if
was
not,
simply
no,
making
Mr.
a
Clark,
comment,
hold on,
and
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, if you allow me, sir, if you give me protection from the others, if you give me the protection from the others, then I will get through my comment.
Mr. Clark, all I would advise you is direct to me and
you
not
notice
to
I'm looking
them,
directly at you, sir?
Yes, but talking to them. So please. please, Mr. Clark. Yes, Mr. Clark. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Once again, sir, let us look at what the thing is. And if there's more than what others want to believe, transparency is of paramount interest, and I think that the members of that entity did follow the guidelines. And as my goodly member said, if there is a problem from our side, and when I say our side, I mean the committee, then we must go back to the powers to say to them, we need to change, we need to amend so that what happened before don't continue to happen.
I think it's important. Members, I'm listening, and I've not engaged in the debate. I've acted more of a referee. I want to just say something that you finished off with, and I think it's important. I will say this. Members, please. Look, it's a mild assault. I will say this. During Ms. Warren's time at Nesol, I engaged some projects there, and when Nesol first came, I made the point that the work, that I had no problem with the work that was done on that project. So I say that because I'm comfortable with my engagement. However, in my work as a committee member, my job here is really to simply interact with the public servants and to ensure that the rules and guidelines we have put in place are followed. And I just want us to be very careful, because our expectation of our public servants are that they provide the best service. That's what we expect. That's a given, and for the most part, that's what we get. However, where there are breaches and problems, we must be careful that we point these out, because we want to ensure they do not happen again. And to the extent that public servants have allowed it to happen, it may be that they think that it is permissible. And I'm just making the point that it has been repeated here, and I just want us to be very clear. The government procurement guidelines are put in place to allow two things. One, competitive tenders, which allow us to get the best value for money. So to the extent that the job was given to somebody that Ms. Warren knew and did it in that manner, I think we must all recognize that that is a problem even in of itself. That's why the procurement guidelines are in place. And secondly, please, and secondly, in putting a contract, and I think what both Mr. Jackson and Mr. Paulwell were getting to, there are very specific rules that the permanent secretary spoke to about fragmenting a contract. So where you have a project and you break it up into 12, 13, 14 parts with one contractor, our job is to explain to public servants that this cannot be done. And I just want the committee, please, to recognize that in whatever we do, that we must send the right signal. So I only say that because of how the discussion is progressing. And as I said, I don't want us today to go over everything and through everything, but please let us, in doing our work as committee members, remember that our job is to defend our constituents first and foremost, and in doing so, send the right message to Jamaica as to what our role is. So I say that just in a general sense. Mr. Campbell, I have Mr. Campbell and I have Mr. Bass. Right after. Right after.
Chairman, in keeping with what you said, I think the point we're trying to determine is whether or not there is in fact breach in relation to the activities which were carried on by Nesol. And do you have a list of those sites where you
Yes, I do have a list.
got service.
Yes.
And can you let me know when the works were carried out on those individual sites?
Yes, I can get that information to you.
You do not have that available?
No, I
But
don't.
during what period was it? I think if maybe that would
Yes,
help.
Yes.
If it is that we are saying that there is a breach, then it presupposes that.
And I think it's a message that we must send, Mr. Campbell, is as important. Over what period was this, the work done?
Over 1 year.
So during 1 year, there were how many projects that Mr. Gordon
19.
So he did 19 projects, and they were all similar projects. They were all similar projects of putting the solar into the campsite.
It was a little over a year.
Yeah.
And could you tell us when the requisitions came to you in relation to those sites? When is it that USF sent you the requisition? We want you to do one in XYZ.
I'll get that information to you. I don't have that right.
Mr. Campbell, if Ms. Warren, I think you had indicated that they had gotten a list of all the sites before and engaged a company which included Mr. Gordon to look at all the sites prior to work starting.
With respect, Chairman, what I'm trying to establish, yes, the information was communicated to us that these sites were to be worked on. But, and I'm being very specific, when did the requisition come in relation to the individual sites? Because if what Ms. Warren is saying is that the requisitions came at different points, it may very well be that what we are attempting to place at their feet is in fact unfair. Because if they got 2 sites on Monday morning, January 1, let's say that's it, and they were asked to deal with it, then it may very well fall under the threshold. And that's all that I'm attempting.
Mr. Vaz,
Another factual point I want to raise.
A what?
In the discussion with the question I asked,
Chairman,
no, hold on.
Protocol of persons whose hands are up and who goes next.
No, Mr. Vaz.
Chairman, I don't think Ms. Warren has. I believe she's now
I
saying.
thought you had finished.
No, certainly, because I haven't got. I haven't got the answers.
I apologize. Sorry.
Can I just respond to the chairman saying we got all the sites? We got a number of sites to do the assessment on, but we had to wait on USF to tell us which ones were to be done when.
Yes, which follows on from what I'm saying. When did those requisitions come for the individual sites?
I have Albion, the 28th of the 4th, 18. Barracks Road, 28th of the 2nd. Bowden Hill, 31st of the 1st. Negril, 29th of the 6th. Olympic Gardens, 15th of the 6th. That's some of them that I had, that Mr. Barton just sent to me.
So they came at different times. Yes. Were you given a time frame within which to complete these individual projects?
Yes, we were. It was in the MOU.
Can you let us know what time frame were you given?
Yes. Can we, Ms. Warren, if possible, could we just ask the clerk to photocopy that list for the members? Yes, Mr. Campbell, you're... Chair, we're going to send to get it copied.
Well, right, I'm not... Can you just...
No. How many sheets of paper?
And you were given 60 days from the date of the requisition. All right. So let me go on further. And in relation to those individual requisitions which came on the June and February and January, did any of those exceed the threshold which... $2 million. of $2 million?
No, absolutely not.
Well, and did you at any time get requisitions which were bundled? I mean, did you get 10 requisitions or 5 at any time?
Yes, we got 5. Sometimes we got 1 for assessments. Yes, not labor.
Not labor.
Not labor. We would get.
Well, let me be specific now. In terms of the labor, did you get any of those bundled at any time, which would exceed the threshold?
No.
Very well. Thank you very much.
I don't understand that. Universal Service Fund would have asked you to, would have done the request for labor, or you would have done the request for labor. So you wouldn't have received requests for labor. You would have gotten the projects.
But Universal Service.
No.
Universal Service Fund
would give you the
would have a
projects.
scope, right. They have a scope for each one and the labor cost.
Absolutely. They would give you the projects, and you would get those projects, and then you would contract those projects to your contractor.
Yes.
Member Vaz.
All right, the main question I was asking is back to the signing, but just to clarify the last thing you just asked, you said the USF would have sent like the projects that they wanted to do for assessment, and you said they would have sent sometimes more than 1 for assessment. So when you do the assessments now and get back to USF, would they after that, for example, okay, you have assessed these sites, I wanted to do these 5 sites, or they call and say they want to do this one, then this one, then this one at different times?
We would do the assessments, and they would give us some, and they would give Caribbean Maritime Institute, I understand, some. And then we were the ones who decided when to do the work.
Okay. Yes, that's why I asked. So within the 2 months, so after the assessment is done and they tell you what they want to do, is it that each different time they're going to tell you do this particular one, or did they say do these 5? So if they said do these 5, that would mean that you could at that time execute and say, all right, we're doing this 5 at this point in time, which goes back to the point that it could have been packaged. That's what I'm getting at.
It varies, and we never did 5
So
sites
you're saying
one
it could
time.
have been, but you just chose to do it in that particular.
Right, because we did it, as I said, on the same basis of the pole line, where each one is given an extension.
Yeah, I just wanted
number.
the clarity on that. But what I really wanted to ask, really, getting back to the signing issue, I remember you stated that the chief engineer would be naturally a signing officer. The chief engineer, you said managing director, the chief engineer was one. The chief engineer is not a signing.
He was a signing officer, but it's not that he has to be a signing officer.
Okay, why I was asking, because initially when you mentioned the persons who would normally sign with the chief engineer as one, I was getting to the point, if he was to go and leave, and you bring in an acting chief engineer who naturally now, well, not naturally, let me change the word naturally, but the acting chief engineer now became a signing officer, which would basically go back to the normal procedures of the agency, having the chief engineer as a signing officer. So what I'm thinking, if the chief engineer is going on leave and you're getting somebody acting, why when the chief engineer comes back, since he's the chief engineer, why wouldn't he be a signing officer as was protocol before? Because the fact that you're saying it doesn't have to happen, but the fact that when the chief engineer went on vacation, he was replaced with the acting chief engineer as a signing officer.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you wish to intervene at this point, Mr. Chairman. With the greatest of respect, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Ms. Warren, Ms. Warren. Mr. Chairman, I believe you wish to intervene at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Pardon, say that?
I believe you wish to intervene at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Intervention. But that was the clarity I was trying to get.
Yeah, but I'm not quite certain. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'm saying I believe you, in the interest of justice and fairness, I believe you ought to intervene at this point in time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So
Mr. Chairman, would you wish for me to explain why I think you need to intervene at this point?
No, I'm not, sir.
Because, Mr. Chairman, I believe it is very clear. It is pellucidly clear, Mr. Chairman, that what the member is attempting to do is completely unfair. We have been over these issues time and time again, and we brought Nisal back here again, along with all these public service for specific purpose, to go back to signing officers and who signed. Those issues have been ventilated already, Mr. Chairman. With the grace of respect, Mr. Chairman, I believe you ought to intervene.
Mr. Warren had stated that because he was going on leave, he realized it would have been an issue with regarding to getting the check signed. So it's normal then that the person who acts in that position as a chief engineer, because you said if he was leaving, it would be an issue because the signing would be a problem. So I'm just trying to get that, since the chief engineer is normally somebody who signs and then an acting person comes in, it would just seem appropriate that it would not have been a permanent decision but a temporary decision to have him not sign until he gets back.
Chairman, the question was already answered.
With due respect, let me just say this. There was a discussion earlier that Member Paulwell was asking questions. Other members said that they had some questions. Now, in fairness, everyone has had a chance. I don't think Mr. Vaza simply asked a question, which I think is fairly pertinent. He simply said, if it is a normal thing for the chief engineer to be a signatory on the account, if he's going on leave and you put somebody else, why was it that person was not done temporary rather than permanent? And I'm trying to understand why that would be a question that one would think is not a relevant question. Proceed, Mr. Roth.
I will answer the question. The chief engineer, Mr. Anthony Brown, the chief engineer, was on the account. I don't know if it's normal. I don't know if the chief engineer before was. But let me tell you why it would have been a problem. There are two categories, Category A and Category B. In Category A, when I joined, I was in Category B. Category A a Category A person has to sign. In Category A at the time was Mr. Oswald Williams, chairman, Ms. Sophia Dare, director, and Mr. Anthony Brown, chief engineer. So with Mr. Brown going on leave, it would leave Mr. Oswald Williams and Ms. Sophia Dare signing, who are not on compound at all. What was done, I was moved up to Category A, and then Category B, Ms. Prendergast and Mr. Pommels. Okay, so that we would have somebody here. Thank you.
You can't have two persons from one category signing. It must be one of each. Right.
And we discussed all of this already before.
So if Mr. Brown going on leave, there will be no in the Category A there, so we had to.
Normal procedure.
I replaced Mr. Brown, actually. I replaced Mr. Brown.
Did that help, Ms. Warren? Because all along we thought Mr. Pommel replaced Mr. Brown, but now we're actually understanding that you replaced him in Category A and Mr. Pommel was assigned to Category B. That actually gives us some clarity.
Very, very clear. Very clear. This is what happens in
Mr. Chairman, what I have a problem with is a subordinate officer is being used
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, 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 with respect, Mr. Chairman, I believe you indicated that I was next.
Mr. Terrelong,
I believe you indicated I was next, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Terrelong, with due respect, we're in the House of Parliament. Please comport yourself in that manner.
I'm very composed, Mr. Chairman. I believe I was next.
Not.
So am I not next then, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, am I not next? You indicated I was next, Mr. Chairman. Another member proceeded to speak on the mic, Mr. Chairman, while I was speaking.
We're not in kindergarten.
Mr.
Please,
Chairman, am I not next?
Please comport yourself properly.
I believe I'm very well composed, Mr. Chairman. Am I not next?
Mr. Terrelong,
am I not next, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Terrelong, I'm asking you. It is not a matter of who is next. It's a matter of how we comport ourselves in the highest court of the land.
Exactly, Mr. Chairman. And therefore, persons who are not next, who you did not recognize, should not rush to the mic, Mr. Chairman, to dominate the proceedings. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Terrelong, please. Thank you, members. Proceed, sir.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warren, just to indicate, because I've listened to you, and I'm very concerned that there are members on this committee who are seeking to find breaches and scandals where there are not. And I'm very concerned because I believe that as committee members, we have simply forgotten our mandate. We have simply forgotten what it is that we're here to do and what it is that we're here to ensure that the public understands. Now, you indicate that as it relates to the government procurement procedures, you're allowed to give contracts up to what limit, Ms. Warren? Now, into the mic, please.
Yeah. For works, $2 million.
$2 million. Yeah. And at any point in time, was there any contract given to Mr. Gordon that surpassed this $2 million?
No, there's not.
And consequently, Ms. Warren, there would have been no need to tender these projects?
No, not how we got them and how we distributed them.
All right, thank you. So you executed your duties efficiently and within the remit of your powers, and there were no breaches?
To the best of my knowledge.
And as it relates to customer satisfaction, Ms. Warren, USF, you indicated, just if you could just remind me of your response, you indicated USF was very, very well pleased with the work that you carried out?
Yes, they were, and NESOL as well. I am very proud to have been a part of this. I visited the sites, and I actually asked that stickers be placed on them to say powered by NESOL, because this is the beginning. To me, this is the beginning of NESOL's foray into the renewables market, and for Vision 2030. This is the beginning for NESOL, and I hope it can continue and should continue.
So would you agree with me then, Ms. Warren, that under your stewardship, NESOL remain committed to facilitating the deployment of cutting-edge, sustainable, and cost-effective energy solutions to communities throughout Jamaica?
I would say that, and they continue to do so.
All right, thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, just a question. Was there were there any other contractors doing this, the work that Mr. Palmer was doing?
Mr. Rayon Hamilton here is a supervisor for
No, I'm
solar.
just saying but on the CAP projects.
Yes, the CAP project. He's a supervisor for the CAP projects.
Yeah, I'm not understanding the answer, though, sir.
I guess I'm not understanding the question.
No, I'm just asking, Mr. Pommels was the contractor used for the CAP projects.
Mr. Pommels
Sorry, not Mr. Pommels, my mistake. I apologize. No, I didn't mean Mr. Pommels, Mr. Gordon, my mistake. Mr. Gordon was the contractor on the CAP sites?
So far, yes, he is the contractor here, but we're still looking for
and he had done. Permanent secretary, just a question. You understand what Mr. Terrelang was getting at. If you as permanent secretary, I would like your opinion on how many projects did he get in the year?
19 sites.
And they were all under the 2 million. Would you, permanent secretary, have a problem with that?
I'm listening to what is being said, and I have a better understanding and appreciation of what transpired. On the face of it, when we appeared before and we were told that a contract of $21 million was awarded with no written contract, my view then was that, based on what was presented, the contract was splintered, which is against the procurement rules. As to how it was done, based on what Mrs. Warren has said, it is something that I would like to look at the reports to see for myself and to form an opinion on. But in my dispensation, if you have a $21 million contract, it would not be the norm to administer it in the way it was done. But given the explanations that she has now given, it is something that we could look at to make a determination whether the procedure followed the guidelines as there.
And just to follow up with that, on that issue, Mr. Chairman, because I'm seeing a document here where there were 14 sites that were actively being done at one time in the month of February 2018. I think we can share that with you because that could also indicate the type of practice that is suspected. But, Chairman, if I could just go on to the other issues.
Yeah, I have member, oh, sorry, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah, in response to Member Paul, what you just said, who you got that copy from? I'm not aware of that copy.
Now we got a report here from the Ministry of Energy giving us periods for the contracts, 19, and in our further questions that we were pursuing, we were told, well, this wasn't from the Ministry of Energy, but I was told that there were 14 of these sites that were active. And it's for you to verify. It's for you to verify.
Oh, I'm not aware of that.
Chairman.
No, hold on. Member Stewart had indicated, and then you, and I'm hoping that we are... No, but then you may lose. What? Just ask your question.
Because I wanted to go on to the other issues. The HAJ, Mr. Chairman, we got from the ministry a report from the ministry that $112 million of contract value was signed with the Housing Agency of Jamaica. The amount received was $40 million, and the amount expended was $36 million. This came directly from the ministry. So I'm firstly asking Mr. Williams if he's aware of this, and what is this about? And did this include that $30 million from the Tourism Enhancement Fund? We got this from, the date of this is the 24th of September from the Office of the Prime Minister.
Member, I would need more detail to go into that, but I know that the HAJ was doing some projects at Barrett Hall, and they were doing another project at Grange. These were some squatter upgrading programs.
Where are these located?
Who? In St. James, St. James.
In a number of constituencies or in one constituency?
You know, so you know the person who was there. Why are you going behind the scenes?
No, I'm asking.
No, I wouldn't know about that. I wouldn't know about that.
No, I don't know. I'm asking specifically. Where are these places located?
Grange in St. James and Barrett Hall in St. James.
Yes.
Grange in St. James?
In St. James, yes.
So why you mention? No.
Yes.
So it is, they were all in St. James?
Yes.
Both in St. James, yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is there any particular member of parliament associated with these two locations? I just want to know.
We got on a point of order.
I want to know.
We have been here before. I actually remember this question and I remember the answer.
What's the answer?
I remember the question and I actually rember the answer.
What is the answer?
And I cannot fathom why we are here over and over discussing the same things.
We're not moving on, you know.
The project in the last response was one that was ongoing from the previous administration, and those two sites were actually just being completed. When the assertion made that Minister Ed Bartlett's constituency was the recipient, then assertions and innuendos were made that I recall the minister saying he did not appreciate. And he also further answered that it was the completion of an existing program that had those two sites
I still need the answer.
Or squatter settlements remaining. And it was answered
Chairman, let me tell
at
you
a
why.
previous PAAC meeting.
No, we got an answer in relation to 30 million. What I'm seeing here is a contract value for 112. What is this about? It's not 30 million we're talking about now, it's 112 million. Oh, you didn't get it? See, right. It's an entirely different matter.
But the minister don't change.
It is
member.
Yes, but it is unusual because normally these locations cost about $5 to $10 million. No. Well, tell me why 112?
Mr. Chairman, you know very well what Lilliput looks like. No $5 million can do any upgrade in there.
Yes.
And if it was answered already.
I think once again, please.
Yeah, it was answered in some part, as I was told. That means the member of parliament don't change and the constituency don't change.
No, Mr. Clark.
No, but that's a question that was asked. No, that's a question that was asked. Who was the member of parliament?
Mr. Clark.
Ms. Warren,
hold on. No, Miss Wallace, please.
All right,
these are.
Can I answer?
Members, 1 second. No, 1 second.
I
no,
need
Miss
to answer
Warren.
this.
Warren, 1 second, please. Members, I think the more substantive question that is being asked is that if we were informed that it was 30 million. No, I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying.
It wasn't that the contract was 30 million. It was that 30-odd million was spent to date, and that was partially the total value of the contract.
So, Ms. Holness,
the total contract was there.
Mrs. Holness, let me just, Member Holness, I would ask you, I mean, I am very close. I have not seen the document, but I will say to you that I myself did not know that we were, I mean, the 36 million we knew about, but I did not know that it was a portion of 100-odd million to be spent from tourism for squat upgrading. That I did not know, so I'm not quite certain. Yes. Sorry, please.
This project with HAJ, Barrett Hall and Grange, the first pay, it's a contract for $112.5 million. When I got there was no contract. If you can see from your documents, the first installment, which is wrong, we have the checks, were paid over on November 15 and 18, 2016, not 2017. When I got in there and this HAJ project was being back and forth, I asked my team to go down there and do an estimate of what the work would cost. And it came back at over $300 million. But an agreement was already made for $112.5 million. It is a wide area. People have to be moved. There's a lot of pole line work. There's a lot of housewide. It includes many things.
Could we get the scope of that work?
Yes, we'll give you the scope of it. We'll give you the scope of it.
Yeah. No, but Chairman.
So today, only
out
36.
of the $112 million, we have received 40.
Please.
We have received $40 million, and we have spent 36.6.
You have received $40 million
out of the 112.
But the contract you have is for 100.
112.
And this is with the Tourism Enhancement Fund?
It is with the HAJ. We do not have a contract with the Tourism Enhancement Fund.
Okay.
We have a contract with the Housing Association of Jamaica, who we do work with all the time, not the TEF.
Right. So that 30 we were told about from TEF, is it through the same channel? Is it a part of this 112, or is it a part of a?
Yes, it would be. Yes, it would be.
So it came via housing agency.
We were contracted by housing agency.
Right. So the TEF would have paid it through the housing agency.
Well, we get our contract is with HAJ, not TEF.
The PS is noting that as well.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Through you to former Managing Director, Mrs. Warren. Are you aware, Mrs. Warren, of works being carried out at a private housing scheme in Malvern, Remar? Could you tell us the scope of work and the amount of work that has been expended? I understand that some 14 poles have been planted. There are 14 on the ground as we speak, and the work has ceased in recent times. Could you tell us about that project?
When did that start? We'd have to get back. We'd have to get that information.
The work is being carried out by Nessol.
Yeah, but I think
private work.
Yeah, we might have to ask that as a specific question proceeding.
Are you
If
aware?
you don't have the
Are
information.
you aware? Somebody needs to answer if you're not aware.
All right, could you remind me of the name, member? The name of the area? Braemar?
Yes. Take the name and confirm whether or not that is
Mr. Stewart,
government
what's the
work.
name of the,
That's government work, because I presume you're able to do private work if you're privately paid.
Right, right.
Yes, it's
Braemar.
Braemar.
Did you say
Malvern.
Braemar?
Yes, Malvern.
Yeah, read right there.
Okay. All right, so Chairman, through you. Remember, you made mention of you said it was private. I'm not sure of that component, but I'm seeing where it is listed here on our project document of proposed line extensions for 2016 to now, and I believe indeed some works are being carried out from another report that I have, but I would have to get more information on that.
Please.
Yeah.
All right. Member, yes, can you send us a report on that? You're up, Member Holness.
Ms. Warren, I would like to personally thank you for being here today. I quite understand the circumstances under which you have had to come back here, and I know it could not have been easy. I have a question for you as it relates to my own constituency, but I hope the chairman would indulge me a little. Yes, Mr. Paulwell, you're not the chairman. Please indulge me a little, Chairman. I have picked up from some of the discussions, particularly with USF and with NESOL, that some persons who have done extremely good work for the government have taken a fall. And I would love for us as a government to look into, both from the position of permanent secretary in terms of policies and how we operate, and for those who are taking positions to be better guided in ensuring that where you find opportunity for gray area, we don't take them. We literally should go on a quest to ensure that when we are given responsibilities in various agencies, ministries, and we realize there are gaps or loopholes, that we start pointing them out and making the necessary changes so that persons who come after us, who may not necessarily have the best intentions, do not have the opportunity to use said loopholes. As it relates to my own constituency personally, I have a site at Windsor Lodge, 9 miles, that I came and saw as a member of parliament. It had 40 computers at the time. It was placed with solar facilities. The batteries were stolen. I saw a bill in excess of $600,000 from JPS. And so, having been a member of parliament for 2.5 years, unless I can find that money out of my pocket, there is nowhere to be able to pay JPS to get light back or to be able to use the facility. So since you're before me, Chairman, and the person who takes over, I'm making a personal plea on behalf of the people of East Rural St. Andrew to look at that site so we can have it up and running, because it is a challenge. We're using it, but we can't use the computers. So it's Windsor Lodge, 9 miles, and that site had 40 computers. I think recently they stole 4 and stole one of the ACs. And we continue to struggle with keeping it up because there's no light at nights.
All right.
We didn't.
Member Holness, I've allowed you.
I've asked for a write-off from
please.
JPS,
Did look
and
at it.
it's not being granted.
We did look at that site.
I've allowed you that Mrs. Holness, I've allowed you that advertisement. Yes, I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has fallen on fertile ears. Yes. All right, members. I just want. Let me just. There is a question that I would like to ask before because I do intend for us to be out of here by 1 o'clock. But, Mr. Williams, just a question that has. I've asked this question of one of your colleague chairmen at Universal Service Fund. The process of hiring persons, you during the period 2016, you did go through a period where you had some new persons, and there was a disengaging of the person who was the managing director at the time. You could just take us through that process for me. What happened with the previous person, you know, and how what happened during that process? Just.
You're speaking about the former managing director?
Yes, and that whole process and the transition and how it took place as board chairman, yes. Just to understand how the board and the chairman.
Remember, the managing director resigned. I have a letter in which he resigned. I'm actually looking for it. And you can keep
yes.
a copy for the record.
Who was the managing director before, please?
He was just a minute, my friend. Let me see. No, look for it again. I have so much papers here that...
Yes.
Oh, yes, I found it.
Yes, absolutely.
You can copy it and keep it?
Yes, I will, but you can give me the...
He was the managing director.
Who was he?
Mr. Garfield Daly.
Garfield Daly, yes.
He's the Reverend Garfield Daly.
Okay, and he was there for some time before?
Well, he was there for about 5 years. He was there from December 2011.
From December 2011?
Yes.
All right. And, yes. And you're saying he resigned?
Yes, sir, he did.
So what was the process? What happened during that period of time?
Well, Ms. Warren, who was there, was asked to act as managing director in his absence.
How long was Ms. Warren there?
Ms. Warren was there from October 2016, October 2016.
So that would have been, what, 2 months?
Roughly 2 months, yes. She was there, yes. And
her substantive position was?
She was an executive HR assistant. She was an executive HR executive. Executive HR, what is it? Executive.
I was.
Hold on, I have the information here. You're right, it's an executive HR. What was it? Okay. She was an HR executive. And she was asked to act as manager. What?
No, Mr. Williams.
Yes.
She came there as an HR executive.
Yes.
Or assistant. I'm not. What is the official title of the post that she came to fill when she came in October?
She came in as an HR executive. What happened? We had difficulties with the HR. That's the first thing. We did an audit on HR, and it showed up a lot of deficiencies. So Mr. Garfield Daly, the manager, asked me if he could bring in somebody to assist with his HR problems. And then Ms. Warren came in that capacity.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Your HR department had some problems.
Yes.
and you need the problem to be fixed.
Yes.
Hold
on. The truth is, it is really the personnel officer that was there, because the way how that place was structured initially, they had nothing named HR department. It is a carrying over from JPS. And when they had difficulties in there, 3 people were there. The general manager, or the managing director, the chief engineer, and the cost accountant, 3 people. And they solved all the problems that they had there. Hold on. You want to answer something?
No, I thought you were finished.
Those 3 people solved the problem. I was chairman at the time, 2007, 2008, and I felt it was unhealthy, because I figured we should have somebody dedicated to HR or personnel. So I negotiated to see if we could get that position filled. It turned out that we got somebody for personnel office, and that person continued. But then they continued, and when the audit was done, they found out that person continued through until 2016. And then we end up with, we had, the job really passed the personnel officer's position. It really required HR. And so that is how Ms. Warren was brought in.
So, are you finished now?
Yes, go ahead.
So Ms. Warren came in to deal with some personnel issues.
Yes.
Ms. Warren came, I would presume, with some wealth of personnel HR management expertise.
She's right here, you can ask her.
No. You were the board was the iron officer at the
No, not the board. The managing director, not the board. We just gave approval and say, yes, you have identified somebody, go ahead.
So Mr. Daly is the one who would have decided on who.
Yes.
Right.
And but after he decided who,
yes,
and it came to the board sanctioned it.
So what Mr. Daly presented to the board, which I presume is your HR committee of the board. You have an HR committee in the board?
Yes, we have an HR committee, yes.
And they would have been extensively involved in this process?
Yes, they would be, but they would give a lot of credence to the general manager if he chose somebody.
Okay. Who chaired that committee, by the way?
Who is it?
Who chaired that committee?
That was chaired by Miss Dare, it was at the time.
Miss Dare?
Sophia Dare.
At the time, yes.
So Miss Dare was was the chair of the HR committee at the time?
Yes.
That would be supervising on behalf of the board what Mr. Daly was recommending.
Yes.
Now, the board now approving what Mr. Daly recommended.
Yes.
I presume that the board was satisfied of what the recommendation was in terms of the expertise that Ms. Warren would have brought to the position to solve the problem you had.
Yes.
So it is fair to say that Ms. Warren came with an extensive background and experience in HR management.
Sir, don't ask me that. Mr. Daly present something to us. He wanted help. He brought somebody. The HR committee cleared it, and we sanctioned it.
So you went on the basis of what Mr. Daly and the HR committee recommended?
Yes, because the person have to work with him.
Okay. So, no, you see, Mr. Williams, I understand what you say clearly, you know, but in the governance structure, the buck stops somewhere, right? And I understand you said they made a recommendation of the competencies. So I'm taking it that Mr. Daly, on whose recommendation you acted, would have been satisfied that those competencies were in order to deal with.
Remember, you keep saying you like his person. It's the board.
When I said no, you as chairman, the board, yes.
The buck stop with the board. I chair the board.
Yes. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
But you are representing the board here today.
Yes.
So you, when I say you, is who you represent.
Yes.
So Mr. Daly's recommendation is expected to have satisfied the requirement for the position and the task at hand.
Yes.
So I just want to conclude that part by saying that Ms. Warren would have come to the position with a wealth of expertise in HR management as was required.
I would say yes, because the manager was satisfied with her.
Okay. Okay, with that said, Ms. Warren, you're here. Could you give us a sense of your background in HR management?
I have a first degree in business administration, and in that I did HR management. I think HR is working with people, knowing how to handle
Mr.
people.
Chairman, on a point of order.
Right.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Can I hear? Yes. What's the point of order?
Is Mrs. Warren still at ENSAL?
No.
Then therefore I don't see why she's on the stand now to give the background.
No, Mr. Clark, please.
No, she's here to answer question directly pertaining to NISAL. If not, sir, then I don't...
Mr. Clark, yes, please, no. Go ahead, Mr.
So, Ms. Warren, I just want you to just give me, not to explain what HR involved, but I'm asking specifically, what was the competencies at the time when you filled the position in October 2017? Is it 2016? 2016,
yes.
When you took on Mr. Daly's invitation to be there to deal with the problem. What were your qualifications at that time? Qualification and experience.
A bachelor's in business administration, studied HR as part of that, and I had managed people for 14 years up to June 2016 when I resigned from my previous job.
In what capacity you managed people for those 14 years?
I was the sales and receivables manager at Nationwide News Network. I managed a team of people. And apart from that, if you know Nationwide, I did not just stick to that. I also managed the organization.
I just want to focus in on the HR management here.
So
because Mr. Williams said that there was a specific challenge there that they were seeking to fix.
Right.
Okay, so that the bachelor's was the background and your experience as a sales manager.
And managing a team of people, different people.
Yes, Mr. Jackson, let me, so Mr. Williams, I was just asking you, so upon the resignation of the former managing director, Mr. Williams,
yes.
What was the process that went on? Did you then seek to find a new general manager?
At first, she was asked to act. And she acted for 3 months. And then after 3 months of evaluation was done, she was asked to continue acting. And she acted for another 3 months, about 6 months roughly. And then we advertised the position. We figure we should advertise at that point. So her acting position was for about 6 months.
So when you advertised it, did you get many persons seeking the job?
That process was handed over to the HR committee of the board, and they took over from there.
That's Ms. Dare.
They do the advertisement.
That's Ms. Dare. That's the minister's assistant at the time.
Yeah, but Ms. Dare was not too well. She was sick, and they assigned somebody else to take over. But it was still their responsibility.
So what did they do?
They did the advertisement. They did the shortlisting, and they came back and reported to the board that they had found somebody.
Just as a matter of interest, were there any what were the general qualifications that the board thought were necessary for the managing director?
I wouldn't have that on hand right now, but I don't understand it.
This one?
Because
the job description for the managing director is in the personnel officer's office. It is a job description. I have a copy of it. It calls for a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration or Electrical Engineering and Public Relations experience. And that has been there I came there and saw that.
You came and saw
that job description.
You said the former person, Daly, he was hired by you in 2011. You were chairman at the time?
Hold on.
When I say you,
Mr. Chairman, the media is here planning out what they must say this evening. I would like them to have some truth in what they're saying.
Okay.
The employment was done by the board.
Yeah, apologize.
The board.
Who was chairman of the board?
I was the chairman.
Oh, yes, I apologize.
Okay.
All right, so the board of which you're chairman had him in December of 20. What were his qualifications?
I wouldn't remember that right now, sir, but he was qualified. I would have to look at his resume.
You say he was qualified. Do you remember what were the reverends?
I don't know.
What was who? Mr. Daly?
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Daly was an established person, well-known, worked at JPS.
He was what? He would be an electrical engineer?
Sir, I don't want to go into that. I don't have that detail here, but he would be electrically biased.
The reason I ask is that one would think that something like Nessal, historically, that the person who would be in charge of it, that it would be weighed heavily to person with the technical background.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
That is why you have a chief engineer, and that is why you had HR issues, because you have a company with electrical person at the head, second in command electrical person, all the supervisors electrical persons, and that's HR management skill. And that was what I understood that the board wanted at the time.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Terrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mr. Williams, to you and your team, thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning. You indicated that you were chairman of the board. Just if you could indicate, Mr. Daly, who was the general, you said he was the managing director. Yes? How long was Mr. Daly the general manager for?
He was there since 2011.
2011, so 2011 to 2016. So he would have been the general manager for at least 5 years.
At least. Yes.
All right, thank you. And so when he, the general manager, made the recommendation to the board that Ms. Warren was suitably qualified as it relates to the position for the HR director or HR executive, did you have any reason whatsoever to doubt his recommendation?
No, member. I had no reason to doubt it.
Thank you, sir. And so, acting on the recommendation of Mr. Daly, who had been there for 2011, you're stating that the board relied upon his recommendation and Ms. Warren was hired in those circumstances?
Yes, member.
Thank you so much, sir. And when Ms. Warren became the general manager, the board again had no difficulties based on how she had executed her job description as the HR executive and the competence that she had shown.
You're correct.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Let me just add something, that she was an excellent performer. Excellent.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you, sir. I mean, based on what we've seen so far and based on the reports coming out of NISAL over the last 2.5 years, I believe I'm equally convinced of that, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Chairman, thank you. Through you to Mr. Williams. In recent times, Mr. Williams, there was about a 50% increase in the employment of persons at the organization. What was the rationale for that?
Mister, I wouldn't say it is 50%. Whatever the percentage was, there was an increase between 2011 and 2016. When in the previous, the employment was down. The NISAL was rebranded to include these alternate energies, and we need personnel on to carry out those work. The truth is, my vision for NISAL was for it to assist in spreading more electricity in the rural area. And so I wanted to have the opportunity to take on some apprentices, train them, get them to JPS. JPS have a training institution. Get the contractors who work with Nessal to take on some of these youngsters from different rural areas, let them work as apprentices, and then eventually become electricians. And we would expand the electricity system island-wide. I could go on and on if you want to. If you have enough time, if you can give me a few minutes.
But Mr. William, but despite all that, we are still seeing where we have significant number of areas that are without electricity as we speak.
Hold on,
No.
Mr. I like that question, sir. Can I continue? Can I continue?
All right,
Sir, member.
Please, yes, go ahead.
Mr.
No, through
Chairman,
me,
can I be
yes.
protected, sir?
Through me, yes, I'm trying to. But direct it at me, and
okay,
it
what
will be
we
on
now
unsafer
have,
ground.
Yes, sir. What we now have as Nessal, you know what it was, sir? It was Rural Electrification Program, and it was brought on by a politician. Few people know that. A politician named Wilton Hill, between 1968 and 1972, was Minister of Public Utilities and Housing. As he traveled around, he discovered that a lot of the rural districts have no light. And so he tried to impress JPS to run the light to satisfy these districts. But he got a beating. Minister Paulwell, you may not know that gentleman, but he had the road cut for you. What Mr. Wilton Hill did, he went to JPS, and JPS had good technical arguments. The management said it was uneconomical to run the lines there because they would not be able to recover their money in 3 years. So they were reluctant. But they got help from their engineers, because their engineers said that it is a single phase line, they would have voltage drop, they would have losses, technical losses, and so they did not encourage it. And so a lot of those areas would have been left out. What Minister Hill had to do, he had to run down the shares of JPS, and when it valued nothing, he bought it. And so he took over JPS. And when he took over JPS, he put his friend, L.C. Mackenzie, to run it. People accused him of putting his friend in there to run it. And his response was, who you want me to put in there? The enemy? So his friend ran it. And that is, he got the JPS through with Mr. Mackenzie to start this rural electrification program, and it get off there. But I tell you something further, sir. You're not listening, sir. You are paying attention elsewhere. You asked a question, you know. He went further than that. He went further than that. JPS was very hostile to the concept. And under Mr. Mackenzie, they started the program. But JPS got some help. They got help from a charismatic politician, one Mr. Michael Manley, who told them that if he won the 1972 election, he would close down the REP. Unfortunately, he won, and he closed it down. So REP died. REP right now, as we know it, is a child that has been abused from conception. From conception, it was abused. They closed it down, but as Mr. Manley traveled around the country, he saw the need for it, and he restarted it in 1975 and called it Rural Electrification Program Limited. That's how they continue. But, sir, he put a gentleman there who is said to be his brother-in-law, Mr. Ivan Anderson, to run it. And he ran it until he left. So the whole program there started with that kind of a problem. In your case, yes, we have a lot of outages, a lot of error. As it is now, we probably would need about $2 or $3 billion to cover the whole island, but the areas that required is expanding. You cover the 5% that is left. By the time you cover it, another set of areas is increased. And Chairman, you're a politician. I will ask you in your time to push that this NESAL program, get more resources so we can cover some more of the rural area. Well, we're doing Egypt, we're doing 2 areas for you. We're doing Egypt, one is completed, and there's another area that we have that we are going to complete.
I would like the fact that we have to spend so much CDF. there's a role for negotiation.
Well, I tell you something. With the CDF, we have put it in a special fund, and when it is exhausted, we will use whatever other funds we have to complete.
I appreciate that. That's good.
Mr. Chairman, I just look at the time. Here, you have a few more minutes, sir.
No, member, unless we have any.
One question.
I think Mr. Paulwell has.
Yeah.
Mr. Dunn, please. Yes, Mr. Paulwell. I didn't know that.
Yes, Chairman, and I want to thank the chairman for the bit of history, but REP was actually started by Mr. Manley. There was a division in JPSCO that used to deal with rural electrification, but it wasn't REP. But Madam Permanent Secretary, I just wanted you had written to us to say that in relation to certain physical documents, that they were not in your possession because they were with the police. I suspect that they're still with the police.
Yes. That's the last update I have.
Yes, and I just want to say, finally, as a recommendation, we heard earlier that the minister's assistant was a signing officer. I think we need to establish a practice where ministers' assistants don't get into these matters because it represents it represents a conflict of interest in any role.
Well, it will be something for the Ministry of Finance because they are the ones who provide the guidelines in terms of bank accounts and so it is something that Ministry of Finance should be directed to the Ministry of Finance, that recommendation, because it cannot be just for the Office of the Prime Minister or the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. It has to be done on a wider basis.
Yeah, but it certainly would represent a conflict of interest for the Minister's assistant to be so integral in the running of operations.
Chairman, sorry, sir.
There's a point of order.
Was a point of order.
Please,
she was a director of the company, a director.
No, member Paulwell and Dunn, I would say that these are deliberations. At the end of the day, the recommendations, we will make those recommendations at the appropriate time.
Except though, Mr. Chairman, with greater respect, Mr. Chairman, we cannot allow members to make statements on the floor that are allowed to stand without the record reflecting the proper truth of the matter. Miss Deere was not a signing officer in any other capacity other than being a director.
Yeah, but she was a minister's
director. She signed in her capacity as a director of the board in no other capacity. Whether or not she was a scholar, she was anything, it's irrelevant as to why what capacity she was a signing officer. Mr. Chairman, with respect, Mr. Chairman, I realize, Mr. Chairman, with the grace of respect, Mr. Chairman, I realize that there are several persons in this committee who have an issue whenever I speak, Mr. Chairman, because I analyze and I speak with clarity so that everybody will understand. Mr. Chairman, whilst I am here, I wear several caps. I wear the cap of an attorney, I wear the cap of a state minister, I wear the cap of a member of parliament, I wear several other caps. However, when I sit here, Mr. Chairman, I am solely as a member of the committee. I am not sitting here in the capacity other than a member of the committee. It is important, Mr. Chairman, again with respect, allow me to finish. Give me the same respect you give other members, Mr. Chairman, when they are speaking. It must be made very, very clear for the media and everybody listening that she signed only in the capacity as a director of the board, in no other capacity. That she's associated or that she's a member of anything, it is completely irrelevant, Mr. Chairman. There are other persons at NESAL and USF who are members of the opposition party who are there in many other capacities, whether as managers, directors, signing officers, chief engineers, many other capacities, Mr. Chairman. And we don't mention that. When they sit here as members of the USF or NESAL. They sit here as public servants, and their political affiliation is of no merit, Mr. Chairman, and that must be made clear. I'm sick and tired of these sensational news highlights and these these flagrant disregard for our civil servants by inflammatory statements being made, and we allow them to stand on the floor. It must stop. Our position here as members is to determine whether there are any breaches. Yes, are we getting value for money? And that must be our focus. But we continue every single week to go on these witch hunts to say, okay, well, who was hired? Who knew who? Who was affiliated with what party? Are we saying to Jamaicans that they must not be affiliated with any single political party? Is that the message we're saying to Jamaican? We want every Jamaican to be enumerated so that they can vote according to their conscience and free will. And no Jamaican must be stigmatized or victimized or must not be the subject of any witch hunt simply because of their political affiliation. It must stop. Value for money, competence and performance. That is what we're looking for.
It's a
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Chairman,
Mr.
Chairman,
no.
On behalf of the committee, I would like to once again thank everyone.
Please, no. I just, Member Terlang, are you finished?
Unless someone says something that's inflammatory, I believe I have nothing further to say, Mr. Chairman.
Member Terlang, please, no. Member Terlang, I think what Member Paulwell said, I made the point earlier, it is something that in terms of the recommendation, the committee will have to deliberate. But the point he's making is not one that we should totally ignore. That persons who work, please, no, I listened to you. Member Terlang, I said to you earlier, please just accord with the respect of listening. Please. I've just simply said that he made a point that in terms of the signing officers on the various agencies, that as much as possible, we should try and separate the political directorate. And I don't think that it's something that cannot be considered. So let's not take it outside of the realm in which it was given. And I think a lot of these, based on why we're here and the problems we've faced, if we leave things as they are, you're going to have the problems over and over and over again. So please, let us try and do some things to change them.
Chairman, since you decided to go into it, I am going to ensure that I place on record the statement by Mr. Paulwell, Member Paulwell, that 14 sites were approved to go through at the same time that caused great confusion. I want to ensure that it is clarified that 1, the document did not come from the ministry stating such, and that though members look very confused, they did not confirm that at any point in time 14 sites were approved at the same time for execution. He actually said at the end that he got the information from somewhere. And we want to ensure that we're very clear in not making statements that then get carried by the media as fact that is not yet proven. Very often we come and we ask people questions on speculation, and then it is carried as if it is fact, almost putting them in a position that they have to deny, and then they sometimes look as if they're not sensible because they don't have a clue as to what we are talking about. So when we come to ask questions, one of the things we should do is our homework to verify that our assertions are correct and truthful first. If we are asking persons sitting across from us to be truthful and to be honest, we have to be honest as members in the information that we are asking about. We must know the answers almost to the questions we're asking because we have done our homework. We cannot just make statements that we don't know to be true.
All the questions I asked, I know the answer to them already.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, in agreement with what Member Holness said, Mr. Chairman, I think the practice where persons waive documents, Mr. Chairman, and saying, oh, I got this document and so on. So, Mr. Chairman, those documents that members are waiving, they must be shown to the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Please. Ms. Warren, all right, members, I'm about to adjourn. Please, Ms. Warren, you had asked you had stated there was a document with a list of projects and the timeline. Oh, I thought you had mentioned it. No, this is the MOU. This is not the right document. You'll ensure that we, can ensure that we get that.
Just as you move for the adjournment. as you move forward, just to clarify, Ms. Sewell indicated, I'd asked some questions, and Ms. Sewell indicated that she was going to be looking at those contracts. I just want to clarify. Because I had asked in the question to Ms.
Contracts, and I had said that I would insert myself in the process.
Right.
There's an update from us, and you should have it. It's
Okay.
there. We had sent to say where they are at. They are currently on hold, awaiting.
Not that aspect of it.
Yes.
I was just enjoining to clarify the point. I'd asked a question about the engagement of Mr. Gordon and subsequently Peak Energy and the process that was pursued in that engagement.
It is in the update that we sent you to.
The process.
Well,
I remember reading that.
I got my information from the acting managing director, and the written report that came states that she's not aware of a competitive process that was used to engage Peak.
Right.
It is there in the report.
Well, that's what, because
Yes.
why I raised it, Mr. Chair, because I'd asked the question of Ms. Warren.
Is that a report that was sent to us by the way?
Yes, sir. Last week it was provided, and it
Okay.
was looked at because
right.
Mr. Jackson
Yes.
read from that report.
That's why I raised it, because I didn't get the response from Ms. Warren speaking to that specific question.
All right, members, it is now 1 o'clock, and I had made the commitment. On behalf of the committee, PS, I want to thank you for coming, Mr. Williams and Ms. Warren. I want to especially thank you for coming. I know it has been a difficult period, and especially the fact that we have put it off a number of times, but thank you for coming. I think it has been very enlightening. Members, it is not the intention for us to meet next week. I will notify you as to how we proceed the week after with regard to whether we do the retreat or how we deal with that issue. And at the same time, we can determine when we do resume, we will continue with the Urban Development Corporation and the Ministry of Economic Growth. Thank you, members. Thanks the House of Parliament and the staff. Meeting is now adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, may I just suggest that we embark upon the retreat, so that there are a number of issues which we need to settle, and perhaps for the date which should be, today's the 3rd? The 3rd. So the 10th, we're talking about the 17th?
I'm going to try, I'm work with the clerk, and we'll determine how we proceed, and then we take it from there.
Very well.